Let's talk about love, and let's talk about modern love. The sonnet, of course, began in the English Renaissance with Petrarch and Shakespeare writing sonnets of romantic love from a masculine voice to usually a feminine audience. And the sonnet tradition has never been able to shake that sort of early associations with romantic love, even though it deviates into religious poetry and sometimes political poetry, and then sometimes just any poems about anything that sonnets can be about. But I want to take a look at 3 love sonnets today. One of them, or the one we're going to start with by Edna St. Vincent Millay, is very traditional, and then we'll see how the sonnet form sort of transforms as our understanding of love transformed over time. So let's start with Edna St. Vincent's poem, Love Is Not All. We see that this poem right away, we need to look and say, well, what is its structure? We can see that it's divided into an octave and a sestet, and it's mostly Shakespearean in form, with an A-B, A-B, C-D, C-D, E-F, E-F, G-G rhyme scheme. Drink, rain, sink again, breath, bone, death alone. And we'll go to the sestet in just a moment. This is, an interesting sonnet right from the start. Edna St. Vincent Millay has of course, feminine voice, and so we have a female speaker instead of a male speaker, and that makes it interesting and refreshing to get a little bit of change into the canon. It opens, like a lot of sonnets do, with declaration. And it also opens with what I would call generalization and objectiveness, where the poem sort of starts off on what I would call a distance, and as the poem moves downward, it will get more and more personal. She doesn't really mention the I of the poem until she gets to right here in the poem. Up to that point, it's just sort of like I am making a sermon about love. And the opening declaration is, of course, that love is not all. Love is not everything. Love is not essential, seems to be what she's saying there. And then she goes on to sort of list all the things that love can't do. In some ways, she is demonstrating that love is filled with weakness, or love is not as important as other things in life. So let's read. This is sort of an opening quatrain. One of the things I want to point out about Edna St. Vincent Millay is that she is actually very Shakespearean in that she likes the in-stopped line. She's not trying to hide her sonnet within jammed lines. She's really enjoying the musicality of them. So let's read the first quatrain. She says, love is not all. It is not meat, nor drink, nor slumber, nor a roof against the rain, nor yet a floating log to men that sink and rise and sink and rise and sink again. So she immediately starts attacking love and says that love is not essential to life. It is not food, it is not drink, it is not sleep, it is not shelter against the storm. And if you're drowning, it is not a floating log that men can grab onto. It will not save them if they're drowning in a river. So she seems to be, denigrating love. We might say that the first half of this poem is, sort of downward, just taking love down a notch or two. She continues in the next quatrain. Love cannot fill the thickened lung with breath, nor clean the blood, nor set the fractured bone. Yet, and here's a little bit of modernism, right? Typically the yet, the volta, would be more down here after the 8th line, but she sort of anticipates it a little bit there. We might say that love is being personified here, but if you're sick with something, these lines always make me very sad, that if you are sick with cancer, that love cannot save you. It does not heal you. Even if a lot of people love you, love cannot fill the thickened lung with breath. It cannot clean the blood. It cannot set the fractured bone. So all these things are negatives about love. These are things that make love seem weak and inessential. But there's a paradox, right? When we're dealing with religion and love, we run into paradoxes, and when we're studying sonnets and poetry, particularly we do. That even though love is not essential, notice she uses some alliteration. She loves these decorative techniques. Yet many a man is making friends with death, even as I speak, for lack of love, alone. The rhyme with alone and bone is a very hard one, both ends stopped, and you hear it very strongly. It makes you feel very much the power of what she's saying here, that a man or woman can have all these things, can have food and drink and slumber and a roof against the rain, and yet that's not enough to live on. There's a paradox there, that love is absolutely unessential to biological life, and yet without it, life is pretty much not worth living. We see a sort of implied personified metaphor. When it says that many a man is making friends with death, that's maybe a nice way of saying many a person is killing themselves. And she makes it very present tense, something I've always loved about her poetry. Even as I speak, it's happening right now for lack of love alone. The L's here, the lack and love and alone, have always struck me as beautiful to the ear as well. So she mentions the I here, but she hasn't really addressed anybody, right? Like, this isn't a love poem addressed to somebody. Right now it's just sort of declarations about how unessential love is in terms of biological life. Now, that's why I say the volta, even though there's sort of like a pre-volta, if you will, right up here, there's a much more marked shift in the last 6 lines because she begins addressing someone, a man with whom she presents a hypothetical about love. She presents an idea that, what if I were being tortured and somebody was forcing me to give up my love? I often mention this in regards to, if you've read the book 1984, where Winston Smith is going to have a mask with rats, which he particularly fears, put upon his face to chew at his cheeks. He screams, "Do it to Julia," which is the woman he quote-unquote loves. So he gives up love out of fear of torture. So she kind of anticipates that imaginary situation. She says, "It well may be that in a difficult hour, pinned down by pain and moaning for release, or nagged by want past resolution's power, I may be driven to sell your love for peace, or trade the memory of this night for food. It well may be. I do not think I would." It's very understated, but it's always charmed me. She has these alliterations. What if I were being pinned down by pain, and I was in agony and moaning for release? Or what if they were starving me, like Petruchio starves Catherine in Taming of the Shrew? If I was nagged by want, past resolution's power, like I don't have enough willpower within me to resist what's happening to me. It could be that if somebody were torturing me and saying, "You have to give up your love for this person, and if you do, I'll stop torturing you." She says, it could be that if you did that to me, I might be driven to sell, and notice she addresses her lover, your love for peace. Or maybe I'd trade the memory of, notice it's very present tense, this night for food, if she were starving. He says, yeah, maybe that could happen, but I don't think so. This lovely little understated, I do not think I would. I agree that most of us aren't as charmed by the rhyme between food and wood. It doesn't sound as beautiful to the ear. But the understatement of, I would not give up your love for anything, is very charming and a sort of beautiful way of declaring something without even being that particularly dramatic about it. So Love Is Not All is a quite traditional Shakespearean sonnet, in rhyme scheme, in stop lines, in use of alliteration, in the way that it shifts from a general sense to a personal sense. All these things mark it as a fairly traditional sonnet. I'd like to look at another love poem, one of my favorite ones, that is not very traditional, although it's similar to Edna St. Vincent Millay's and another one. This poem is called First Poem for You by Kim Adenizio, another living poet. And she writes really terrific little sonnets. She's famous for writing a sonnet, and she ended one line with the word orange. And she thought, oh crap, what am I going to do? Because of course, famously, nothing rhymes with the word orange. And in a sonnet, you have to rhyme, so when you end a line with the word orange, what are you going to do? She ended up rhyming it with the word fridge, a sort of near rhyme, which was fairly clever. I'm always appreciative of those little tricks there. But this sonnet is called First Poem for You, which implies that there are other poems for this person. So it immediately opens not with generalities, but with very specific things. I would point out to you that this sonnet, like Edna St. Vincent Millay's, is sort of perfect Shakespearean, but it is not in stop lines. Instead, like the poem Facts by Thomas Carper, this poem is all in jammed lines, almost every single one of them, except for the rhyming couplet. You would almost not notice the rhymes at all, because they're hidden so well. The poem also does not do the move from the objective general distance, external sort of thing, to internal. The poem opens intimately. And we'll see that this poem, unlike a lot of Shakespeare poems, is very physical and very erotic and very body-oriented. Other than Shakespeare's sonnet, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun," they kind of feel pretty general. They're not real specific about the actual look of the beloved. Here, like Edna St. Vincent Millay's sonnet, we have a woman's voice talking. And she is talking to her lover, who has tattoos on his body. So immediately we're in the world of visual imagery. And I would say it's blue visual imagery. It's a very blue poem because her lover has blue tattoos upon his body. She has little touches, sort of tips of the hat toward the tradition of the sonnet with the use of alliteration and things like that, and the use of imagery. But on the whole, it feels very, very modern. If nothing else, because when we call this poem a love poem, we kind of want to call it a love poem because it's kind of ambiguous in its approach to love. What we basically have, right, when we read this sonnet is a woman who is admiring the tattoos upon her lover's body. And she tells us something strange that she likes to do, that she likes to touch his tattoos in complete darkness. Now, let's just read the rhymes so you can hear how Shakespearean it is with that ABAB sort of rhyme scheme. Complete of, neat above, blue serpent, you spent, kiss until, persist still, terrifying, trying. Well, terrifying is not a word we expect to see in a love poem for sure. And I do want to point out the beauty of the word kiss and persist. I'm always liking rhymes that I wouldn't have come up with myself. Now, if I read this poem and I stop at the end of the lines, you'll hear how enjambment works. I like to touch your tattoos in complete darkness when I can't see them. I'm sure of where they are, know by heart the neat lines of lightning pulsing just above. You can see that that's not the way to read the poem. I often draw little arrows here to say, keep going, keep going, keep going. There's always sort of a headlong, rolling sort of feel to an enjambed lines, depending on the poem. A lot of times it can convey, a lack of control and passion. And this poem is an interesting sort of meditation on, this powerful emotion, but trapped inside this little box, which we see in a lot of sonnets. Let's, if we look at it carefully, you're like, well, how do you divide this up? Well, this is the first division, right? It sort of has I'm sorry, there's one more sentence right here. I'm just looking for the big markers, like the periods or the semicolons. She rarely will put a period at the end of a line. Instead, she's hiding them all, right? They seem to be divided up just a little bit there, but here is an end stop line, and here is an end stop line that creates a really powerful sense of finality in the poem. So let's read it in the pieces that she's given us, what I call the sentences or the syntactic units. I like to touch your tattoos in complete darkness when I can't see them. I'm sure of where they are, know by heart the neat lines of lightning pulsing just above your nipple, can find, as if by instinct, the blue swirls of water on your shoulder where a serpent twists facing a dragon. When I pull you to me, taking you until we're spent and quiet on the sheets, I love to kiss the pictures in your skin. They'll last until you're seared to ashes. Whatever persists or turns to pain between us, they will still be there. Such permanence is terrifying. So I touch them in the dark, but touch them. Try. Such a great, great, great poem. Filled with visual imagery at the top, and there is something sexy, I suppose, about having her lover's body memorized where she knows where the tattoos are even when she can't see them. And what we have really here is a poem about permanence and something that's lasting versus something that, is contemporary or disappears very quickly. It only takes for a second. I'm sorry, I meant temporary, not contemporary. She's haunted by it. So we have this ambiguity that really makes the poem interesting, right? Is that she knows that the tattoos will still be there even if they break up, whatever turns to pain or persists between us. And so she is fascinated by the idea that the tattoo lasts forever because she's not sure that this love is going to last forever. We're used to men having commitment issues, but here we have a woman with commitment issues. She's not sure this is love, and she's kind of terrified of committing to him. She finds the permanence of the tattoos terrifying. That's a very strong diction word. It's terrifying. But she still wants it. She wants it and she doesn't want it. And sometimes I describe it as putting your hand half over your face. You know, you want to look, you don't want to look. But so she finds it terrifying, but she touches them in the dark anyway. And she touches them trying. I love that the word trying, which kind of should have an object behind it. You know, it's sort of a verb that says I'm trying to do something. I like that she leaves it ambiguous. So we're like, she's trying to what? Understand commitment, trying to figure out if she really loves this guy, trying to understand what's wrong with her that she doesn't like commitment. These are all things that are moving through the poem, which is very vivid, very intimate. It almost feels, you know, a little voyeuristic to read this poem. But also, what a great use of the form of a sonnet, and yet sort of hiding a sonnet at the same time. Now, the last love poem I want to talk about is one that I'm not as familiar with as some of the other ones, but it's titled Embarking by Marianne Shore, and she opens with a line from Petrarch. I won't try to read it in Italian, but generally, this is from one of Petrarch's sonnets, so the original creator of the sonnet, and he says in this translation, "My ship full of oblivion sails." So in this poem by Petrarch, he's using a boat as his central metaphorical conceit. And that is exactly what Marianne Shore is doing here. She is using the image of a boat and describing embarking upon that boat. Now this is a love poem like the other two that we've been looking at. Maybe a little more traditional in that we see that the boat image is very popular in a lot of the sonnets here because it's the beginning of a journey and there's something a little bit scary about being out of control there. When we look at it, we can see that it is one long sentence for the most part. And we can see that it's entirely built around the conceit of the boat and what going off on the boat feels like. It is Shakespearean in form. We can read the rhyme scheme. Drown, straits, aground, navigate. Reappears dark, peer, embark. Light stars, sight far, survive, alive. Now, if we're going to sort of analyze a little bit, we'll see that the first quatrain is basically about the dangers of love. Knowing that when you fall in love, you know, you are taking a big risk and you might get your heart broken. So she says, despite the dreams and yearnings that lie drowned, the flotsam of desire, the fearful straits, the capsized hope, the passion gone aground, the tides too treacherous to navigate. These are all the dangers of love. And of course, when we're talking about boating, you know, the worst thing that can happen is that your boat sinks and that you drowned. She talks about the fearful straits, making us think of the Odyssey, that you got to travel through dangerously narrow waters, that your hopes might capsize, your passion might run aground, and the tides might be too treacherous to navigate. So the first four lines are just simply, despite all the bad things that love can bring, you, and she's not referring to so much a lover here, like a male audience listening to her. She seems to be just referring to all of us, that even though we know the bad stuff that can happen with love, we still lift our gaze each time love reappears like an ocean liner gliding through the dark, right? That's our big simile. That we might call it a metaphorical conceit, which is what I call it because it's very big for the poem. So when love reappears like an ocean liner, without a thought, you rush down to the pier and climb aboard and once again embark. So we all can't resist love. We've got to get on there. And we notice that it has that what I call headlong, sort of rushy, exhilaratory tone where it's just moving forward. You rush down to the pier and you climb aboard and you stand upon and you raise and you watch. You climb aboard and once again embark and stand upon the deck ablaze with light. And we see that this is sort of moving upward now where the images and thrills of love are being present. And you raise your glass beneath the glittering stars and watch the harbor slowly fade from sight, not caring where you're going or how far, knowing the odds are slim that you'll survive, yet never having felt quite so alive. What an interesting use of the sonnet form, right? Like the volta occurs here in the very last line. Similar to Shakespeare, Shakespeare will often sneak it right here. Sometimes he'll sneak it a little bit right here. But generally, it's because love makes us feel so alive that we pursue it, regardless of even knowing that it's going to end out bad. It reminds us of Tennyson's line from the Victorian era that it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. At least you got the high, you might experience the lows too. Maybe not, but even if you do experience the lows, it's still worth it. So a very charming love poem that doesn't really show off its poeticness other than a giant metaphorical conceit, and makes us think about when we want to get on the boat of love.